Thanks very much for checking out this episode of Turning to Him. If you enjoy what you hear, feel free to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave comments, share it with your friends, all the basic stuff. When you do things like that, it makes it easier for other people to find the channel and add goodness into their lives. Thanks again. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Turning to Him. My name is Zach Batty, and I am here with Scott Christopher. For those of you who perhaps have been living under a rock for the past 20 years and don't recognize Scott Christopher, he is an actor. He's a public speaker. He's a father of 5. Currently lives in Nashville, Tennessee, 5 minutes away from his 2 grandchildren. Congrats on the grandchildren.
Thanks. Yeah, I really didn't do much of the work there, as you know, but
But from what I understand, you get all of the reward.
all the fun. In fact, tonight, I just got back from picking them and their parents up from the airport. They were in California for an entire week visiting the other evil grandparents. The name we can't talk about them. They're me, and Papa. We're grandma and grandpa. We went the traditional route.
Yes, yeah. So we know what that means.
Yeah, right.
I have no idea what that means.
I don't either. But yeah, it's fun. They moved out to Tennessee a couple of years ago, and we were looking for an opportunity to just kind of dig up our roots and go somewhere else. And my wife is from California, and I'm from Michigan originally, and we met out west, and we've stayed out west for our whole marriage. And once our kids were grown and gone, we just thought, let's go live in the mission field, and have those experiences. And so Nashville seemed like a great place. One of our sons had moved here, and he had 1 grandchild at the time. And my wife just said, I can't live without that boy. And so we found a really neat place to, I think, retire in here. And they're in another LDS ward. But we're still only about 5 to 10 minutes away from their house. So we're both on the respective borders of our wards.
Yes.
But we didn't want to be in the same ward for fear of suffocating them. And so it's worked out really nicely.
That's fantastic. That's great. Tell me about what life was like growing up. Where did you grow up?
Well, the first until about 7th grade, I grew up in Michigan. I was born in Detroit. My parents divorced when I was less than a year. My mother was a really faithful Christian. We attended a lot of different churches. I remember as a young boy, kind of going to the different Baptist, Nazarene, Pentecostal, Catholic, even Mass now and then. She was searching. She was a pretty golden contact for the missionaries when they finally knocked on our door. And it took her a while. She was pretty stubborn. She thought they were brainwashed.
Okay.
These poor kids from out in Utah.
Yes.
And but when she finally dug in and actually read and prayed about the Book of Mormon, that's when she had her moment. And again, being a very faithful lover of Jesus and always a really good Christian anyway, it wasn't a huge leap for her to accept the fullness of the gospel, because it was something that she was really desperately aching to find. So thanks to her, we were baptized there she was baptized and my older siblings were baptized in the Detroit area. Then we moved up. She moved us, well, as I mentioned, she was divorced. So we moved away from my dad a little bit. We moved up north. And I was baptized a couple of years later when I was 8 in a river in the winter.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we didn't have a ward. Well, we were a branch, but we didn't even have a branch building. So our branch president had a river that ran behind his house. And I'm a January birthday. We waited until March. I thought that was really charitable. But still, March in northern Michigan is still
frigid
Arctic tundra. I mean, honestly, it's still snowpack.
Yeah.
And the river was iced over up until about the middle. There was water running, so he had to chip away the ice from the edges, and then we went in and it was very memorable as he carried me up the hill back to his house, and I was frozen. And he said, "Well, yeah, this is kind of how the pioneers did it, you know." And I was like, "What's a pioneer?" You know, I didn't even know what he was talking about. You know,
Oh my gosh. I mean, joking aside, for an 8-year-old, that's a different level of commitment. You're like, wait, you want me to do what? You want me to?
well,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, but you know, they kind of they talked me into it because first of all, I was excited. I wanted to
Yes.
do it. My brothers and sisters had done it. I don't think I really inherently understood the symbolism, the impact, the meaning behind it. I maybe a little bit, but it was just because it was a rite of passage and it's what you did. But I think they talked me into it because they said it's going to be such a great memory. You know, you'll have stories to tell. And here I am 50 years
Yeah.
later telling the
Yeah.
story, you know. So it's true, it worked. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. All right. So you're spending time in upstate Michigan
Yeah.
and not a huge population of the church up there. I mean, you
No.
said that you didn't even have a branch building.
We met on an Air Force. Well, we there's an Air Force base near Oscoda where we lived called oh my gosh, somebody will know, but I can't even remember now. Anyway, it'll come to me. Dang. But anyway, it was an Air Force base. And so there, of course, were members of the church that lived on the base. And so they had a branch. We met in the mornings for Sunday school on the base. And then in the afternoons, 5, 6 hours later, it was how we went to church back in those days. You know, it was like all day.
Yeah.
We would go to sacrament meeting out in an Elks Lodge out in the woods that the church was renting out on Sundays only. And so we were driving all over the place. And because we lived about 70, 80 miles from Oscoda, we actually would drive down and stay with the branch president or someone else on the base all day,
Yes.
then get home that night. So Sunday meetings was literally an all day. Our stake conference was about 300 miles to the south, and that was always pretty fun to be able to go and do that. But yeah, we were poor. We lived in a government funded housing project in one of the towns we lived in, and we really learned to appreciate everything we had. And my mother was very, very firm about family home evening on Monday nights, reading the scriptures together every day, kneeling for family prayer at night and in the mornings. And she was a really great missionary. She was always getting people baptized and bringing them in. That branch grew. It became a ward eventually. We were gone, but by then, so in 77, we moved to Utah. Yeah.
Okay.
And ended up in Orem.
Okay. Um, at this point, was your dad in your life at all?
Yes, you know, he was a weekend or a
Okay.
few weeks in summer kind of a thing. My older siblings knew him much better than I did. He didn't really play much of a role in my upbringing. And he wasn't a member. He had nothing to do with the church. I don't think he really minded that we all were
Hmm.
Mormons. Um, but yeah, he didn't want to hear about it. We
Yeah.
didn't talk when we were at his house. We didn't bring it up. You know, he was cool with it, but just leave
Leave
him
it up
out of it.
there. Leave it up
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
keep it there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. As a young kid, did you feel different at all? I mean, I'm assuming that when you went to school, you were not surrounded by members of the church
No.
and
Yeah.
that none of your friends were members of the church or anything like that. Did you feel that, or was that just that's just how it is?
No, you feel it. They don't know unless you tell them, especially in elementary school in northern Michigan. I think if I'd have told them at that time we were all calling ourselves Mormons, right? I mean,
Yes,
it's
yes.
obviously different today, but I think maybe if I'd have even said the word Mormon, most of them would just go, "What is that?"
What's a woman?
There was just a real ignorance on the subject, and I don't think it was discriminatory in any way. It was just it's Northern Michigan. What do we know from Mormons? You might as
Sure.
well make up another church name, and we won't know that one either.
Yep.
But having said that, you go to primary every week on Tuesday or Thursday or whatever. You had to go back down, to have primary 60 miles away in the middle of the week. And you're learning the songs, you're learning about the word of wisdom, you're learning the gospel. And my mother was telling me, we don't say this, we don't say that, we don't joke about this, we don't tease about that. And I loved her. I revered her. She was my hero. So I really just I was sort of dogmatic in the sense that that's what my mom wants. And I know Jesus and I know he loves me. Jesus loves me. Yes, I know, for the Bible tells me so.
Yes.
And so while I was among other Christians, I knew that there was something different about being a Latter-day Saint boy, especially that baptism in the river. I didn't bring it up. I didn't talk about it, but I knew none of them had done
Yes.
that. So that certainly made me different.
Yeah. Boy, it sounds like when your branch president, said, this is how the pioneers did, and you said, what's a pioneer? He could have said, your mother is a pioneer. I mean,
Good
she was
point.
committed. She
Yeah,
was committed.
yeah. And in fact, our whole trek west, it's an interesting story. She of course immediately threw herself into the dating pool, such as it was in northern Michigan in the late 70s, where she really wanted us to have a father figure, bless her
Hmm.
heart. And she married briefly. It was a mistake. She had it annulled, but she did convert the guy. I mean, she brought him into the church and wanted to marry a Mormon man, but it just he wasn't right.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so at one point, she actually started dating a guy who, long story short, tried to kill her. And so one night this is now we'd moved down into central Michigan in a town called Mount Pleasant, where CMU is. And she came in and she said, "Get packed, we're moving," you know. And this was 11 o'clock or midnight on a school night. And I'm like,
Yeah.
like what's going on,
What?
And she had been out with this guy and she'd been trying to teach him and he'd had the missionary discussions, but he was just a little off. And he got a little violent with her and really scared her and threatened her life if she didn't marry him. And she went running. They were in a park and she got up and this guy chased her and she ran out into the street and stopped a car and got in and said, "Take me to 355 Fowler Drive," or wherever it was we lived. And the husband's like, "Who the hell?" And the
Yeah.
wife was like, "Just drive." She could see that my
She
mom
knew.
was,
The wife knew.
yeah, there was danger. And so mom got home and she woke us up and she said, and I don't know why she never called the cops. I'll be honest. She wasn't on the run from anybody. She was just always very discreet and didn't want the neighbors this and the neighbors that. You know how people are.
Yes. Yes.
And so literally the very next day, our home teachers, which we all know now as ministering brethren, but our home
Right.
teachers earned their home teaching letter jackets, if you will. They lettered in home teaching. They rented us a U-Haul. They sold our car for cash that we would need, which was a little green VW Beetle for the five of us. That's all we had. And it was always breaking down. So they got a couple $100 for it. They rented us a U-Haul. They packed up all of our stuff while I was at school. She said, "You'll go to school, and then when you come back, we'll leave." And again, all of us were at school. And we got home. They packed us up. They both took a week off of work. And we said, "Where are we going?" And one of them said, I'm from Orem, Utah. My folks, or my aunt and uncle, or somebody in his family, I think it may have been his grandma, lived in Orem. He'd already called her. She said they can come stay with us until they get a place. And I mean, within 24 hours, before that guy could even make heads or tails of what happened to his fiance,
Yeah. Yeah.
we were booking west in one of the home teachers' nice big 70s boat cars,
Yeah. Yeah.
like an
A land
LTD.
yacht.
Yeah, one of those yachts. Oh, it was so great, so comfortable with the suspension that just floats. So just you're just floating in this boat.
Yeah.
And then a couple of us we had to take turns and ride in the cab of the U-Haul. Um, but we trekked the I think it was 18 or 1900 miles from where we lived. Basically the same route as 80,
Yeah.
the route that the pioneers took, and we landed in Orem, Utah. This is the place at the corner of Maine and 1200 South, I think it was, with Bud and Anna Lou Patton, or their parents. And that's where we stayed. It was the Orem 37th Ward. I couldn't believe that there were wards, much less 37 of them in a town. But then I learned later there was like 168 in Orem and they were all numbered at that time. Now they're all named, but back then it was, what
Yeah.
ward are you in? And we moved to the 88th ward.
We were much less creative back then.
Right. It was just numbers. It's easier to keep track of. It's easier
Yeah,
to keep
that's
records in heaven. Um, Numerically, but that's where we ended up was Orem. So I spent really my formative years from, well, sixth grade, actually sixth grade on, I was a Utahn. And it was a real change. My oldest sister, I'm the youngest of four. My oldest was basically uprooted. I guess it wasn't her. It was the end of the school year. It was in May, so we didn't go to school when we got to Utah. We just sat out the last couple of weeks, and then we started. So it was her senior year at Orem
Oh,
High, and
yes.
then we had a couple of junior highs, and then me, and so we all ended up just kind of being raised in Orem.
Wow. What did that do for the unity of your family?
It's interesting. It's a great question, Zach, because I think everybody's path is obviously different. And it's so easy to make a connection between indigence, poverty, neediness, homelessness, and unifying and crystallizing a family relationship. But then you talk to other people who had a father and who lived in one place their whole life, and they're crystallized.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
like, yeah, they didn't go through the Mormon track, but they
Yeah.
still have their level. But so in our case, but definitely for us, it was, I mean, when you show up and you're the new kid in town, and I went to six different elementary schools, mind you, we moved a lot in Michigan.
Okay.
I skipped kindergarten. I could read when I was 3. So they wanted to put me when I was 5, they wanted to put me in second grade. And my mom said,
Wow.
let's just do one grade
Yeah. Yeah.
because he's a big kid. He'll be okay. But 2 grades, he might be too young and too small. But I mean, I was at this school and that school and this school because we were constantly moving for her to find a different job or for her to go to school. She got her college degree. She went to law school eventually, became an
Oh my
attorney
gosh.
after we landed in Utah. She only practiced for about 10 years because it was so late in life, but that was her dream. Her brother's a lawyer, her nephews are lawyers, my brother's a lawyer now. It was kind of just this family thing to be a lawyer, and
Yes.
bless her heart. While I
Oh
was on
my
my mission,
gosh.
she was in law school. She went back to Michigan and went to Cooley Law School in Lansing, Michigan, and passed. And she was like 50.
Your mother is made of tough stuff.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, she's the real deal.
yeah. No, she actually she used to be a fireside speaker
Yeah.
because she passed away a couple years ago, but she was so big and kind of body and bombastic and had a great sense of humor and a huge laugh, these high cheekbones, these big bright blue green eyes. She was just a beautiful spirit, and she so passionately loved her savior. I mean, her scriptures were so marked, so dog-eared and wrinkled through the years. She was truly, you talk to anyone that knew her, any adult that she ever had a chance to meet, and children, kids, our friends, she had an impact and left her mark. She was She used to say all those things, I'm trying to both be a mother and a father to you, or I'm gonna, I'm gonna lead with the iron fist, but love with the something I can't even, you know,
All you remember was the Iron Fist. That's
right
all.
there.
Yeah.
I mean, this was back in a time when there was corporal punishment, for children, and we
Yes.
definitely she'd line us up because if we were all screwing around and being stupid, she'd like, all right, time for a tune-up, and we'd all put books in our pants to try to ease the blow, and she'd spank us or she'd get a belt. I mean, but it never hurt, and she was always very loving. But it
Yes.
was she just she was a real inspiration.
Wow.
Still is to me. I mean, it's interesting because we weren't terribly affectionate in our family, like hugs and I love yous. I mean, we'd say love you, and stuff like that. But my mom, and it might have been her upbringing, but she wasn't really touchy feely with her kids.
Hmm.
But she was so loving. She would just do anything for you or anything for anyone. And so it was but sometimes the idea of affectionate love
Yeah.
with my mother just seemed odd to me because it's like, oh, people, they hug their moms and kiss them on the cheek. I say, when I got older, I started to do that, but it wasn't without a little, I could tell from her just a hint of discomfort. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. 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 It's not her love language.
Yeah, I guess thank you. Sure. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, when did you start developing a close relationship with the Savior for yourself? Maybe starting to leave, hey, look, I'm just doing this because this is what mom says, and I love my mom, and so I trust her, to this is a personal relationship for me.
Yeah. It should have happened when I was 12 or so. When we'd first moved to Utah, I fell in with a group of kids that were in my ward that were a lot like me, poor, without fathers. Some of them had fathers, but we had just kind of a nasty streak. I don't know what it was, but we started shoplifting and stealing things because we wanted stuff.
Hmm.
And I remember we had just our little band of brothers who would go and we'd steal things or shoplift or do whatever. And I knew, that this, because when you're a kid and you're doing something wrong, it's wrong. I mean,
Right.
I knew it,
Right.
but it was just too easy, especially with friends. And we'd laugh, and then we'd have money to go to the arcade and play video games
Right.
and go see Star Wars again, because we'd seen it like 30 times and things like that. It was like, this is how we live when we're poor. We can't get jobs. Nobody will hire us. We picked cherries one summer. It was awful. You spend hours up in these trees. You come down, they pay you 14 cents a bucket or whatever. It's like, I can steal more than that in my sleep,
Matter of fact, I got a pocket full of cherries right now, pal. So, you know,
Yeah, just taking a little extra off the top. Um, but we got caught, as
okay.
most kids do, and I'm so grateful that I got caught because it gave my mother and the priesthood leaders, but they gave them a real opportunity to teach me about repentance and restitution and a broken heart and a contrite spirit, things that I didn't really associate with anything at all. I didn't have any connection to. I'm certain that my mother taught me those things and my primary teachers, but I was too interested in girls and in
Sure.
having fun and in just, doing what I did. And so it was but it changed me. It scared me straight. I mean, we got arrested, we got taken to the Orem police station, we got booked, we got put in holding cells. Our parents said, give them the full, we were so minor. We were 11 or
Yes.
12. We were just sixth graders, seventh, maybe. And, and then I was suspended from school and all these other things because I'd been skipping school my seventh grade year. I think I went to one term out of the
Wow.
first three because my
Yes.
mom went to work. She had to work, and I
Yep.
would act like I'm going to school. Then I'd turn around and come back and sit and watch soap operas all day and Price is Right, and whatever else, just because I was an idiot. But so I got caught, And I changed it all and I turned it around and I repented and I felt great. And there's so many great little subtle things that occurred at that time that really, really helped me. But I still hadn't really associated that with Jesus all that much. I hadn't really come to that point. It wasn't till all my friends had all left on their missions and I still had a year or more because I was behind them.
Hmm.
A full chronological year from having moved up when I was a kid, a
Right.
little kid. And I just thought, I'm reading these letters, I'm hearing from them. My brother had gone on a mission and he loved it. He went to France and Switzerland. And so I started kind of feeling stirrings to do that, but I was still kind of living my life. I was a freshman at BYU. I was just doing my thing. I had a tail,
Yes.
flaunting,
Yeah.
but my hair is so curly that it just balled up. It was just a Patrick Henry ball on the back of my head, but it would stretch out, and I, of course, had it dyed blonde, and I wore my Walkman headsets and my sockless boat shoes and thought I was really cool. And one day, my not institute, my professor of religion was like, "Hey, you're failing Book of Mormon, religion 121, whatever or
Yeah.
120,
Yeah.
whatever one it was." And I said, "Okay." So and he said, "You don't understand. You're here on scholarship, which I wasn't. I was on a talent award. They didn't give full scholarships at BYU. The U of U offered me a 4 full year, full ride scholarship for acting. And I turned it down because I hated the Utes.
Okay.
I was a local, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So I went to BYU and the guy said, "Well, if you fail religion, what does that say about you? And second, you'll be on academic probation or academic suspension. You have to keep your grades up at the school." I only had a 2.0 when I got in. So they've definitely raised the bar over the decades. I said, "Well, what do I got to do?" He said, "You haven't turned in a single assignment all term." I'm like, "What assignments?" And he said, "There's reading assignments." So he handed me a stack of papers that thick. And he said, "If you get these done by tomorrow, I'll consider giving you some points for them and then you won't fail." And I was like, fine. I was only 17. I was just a little immature and just kind of whatever.
Yes.
I'm like, fine.
Yes.
So I went to the Harold B. Lee Library up on the fourth or fifth floor, wherever we used to go in one of the carols. And I sat down and I started going through these, you know how it is. This is this chapter reading with questions.
Yes.
Nephi was the son of blank. Laban was the keeper of the blank, or whatever it was. But I guess it probably was the second half of the Book of Mormon because actually the chapters I was reading were in Alma
Okay.
and they were the war chapters. And so I'm filling out, I'm just looking for the answers. Yeah. Zemnariah got hanged because he was a dork, or whatever. Like I'm filling in the blanks. And all of a
That's
sudden,
true, but that's scriptural. That's
isn't
true.
that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in there.
And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they hung from the top of the tree, then they cut it. I just love. They
Y-
always made me laugh. It's like not only did they hang him from the top of the tree, but they cut the tree down.
Yeah. You are so bad. There will be no memory of you at all.
Exactly. We just don't even want any vestige of arboreal life left.
Yes.
Anyway, so it was weird because I kind of realized after a while that I lost my place on the questions because I was just reading. I was captivated by what I was reading. I'd never really read the Book of Mormon ever myself. Not in seminary, not at home. Other people read it. I didn't. Youth conferences, everybody bearing their testimony about it. I'm like, well, I don't know. And here I am reading it. Pretty soon, the voice comes over the PA. "It's time to go. We're closing up. Pack it up, kids. This library's closing." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's midnight." And I mean, I had read 10 or 12 chapters and had
Okay.
not jotted down a thing. I was so charged. I didn't know what had come over me. Um, I gathered up my things, you know, and I went home. I lived about 2 blocks south of campus with my RM brother was my
Yes.
roommate in this house, and I was virtually skipping down the sidewalk. I mean, I was feeling really good. I felt really, really just happy and positive and optimistic, and I didn't feel teen angsty. I just felt really, really great. And I go in the house, and he's of course awake. He just got back from a date with his fiance at the time, and he sees me and he goes, "What is the matter with you?" And I'm like, "I don't know, James, man, something is happening. I don't know what it is. I just feel, God, what's going on? I feel fantastic." He said, "What have you been doing?" I said, "Oh, stop it. I don't have any
Yeah.
problems with any of that stuff. I'm just charged up, man. I feel so good." He said, "Well, where were you?" I said, "I was at the library studying." "Well, what were you studying?" The Book of Mormon." And he goes, "Well, you're feeling the Spirit." And I literally, it stopped me in my tracks. And I must have scared him because he said that. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And my little teen angsty 17-year-old eyes just burst into explosive tears. Like,
Yes.
it was like a John Woo film, which is actually a stolen quote from Mobsters and Mormons, which I had
Yes.
the sincere joy of working with one Mark DiCarlo. But anyway, so I am dousing him in my tears. And I said, "It's the Spirit," and he was like, "Yes, that's what it feels like. It's a peace and a joy." I said, "Yes, it's peace, it's joy. I'm not sad. Why am I crying? What
Yeah.
is this salty discharge?" Um, and that's Seinfeld. Anyway,
Yes.
so sorry, there's so many references. But I was so, so blown away by that. And I said, "Well, dang it." I said, I don't want it to stop. I don't want this to end. I love the way this feels." And he said, "Well, we'll read the Book of Mormon again. Go back to the source of
Yeah.
where you felt this spirit and make it a habit." And it's interesting, a few months went by and I got my papers together and I ended up going on a mission when I was finally of age. And honestly, and really, it was really in the MTC where it all came together. I was probably one of the last of the generation who discovered Jesus in the MTC as opposed
Hmm.
to show up ready. Because
Right.
when I was there, when I really finally then read the Book of Mormon from cover to cover for the first time, I was the guy in my district class who, when I got to 3rd Nephi 11, went, "Holy cow, do you guys know that Jesus shows up? He he came to America." Like I am blowing their minds with this discovery, and they're all just like looking up.
Yeah. Yeah. Your MTC teacher's like, oh, oh
Yeah. Oh
boy,
boy.
we got some work to do.
But let me finish this whole getting close to the Savior. It was it was those series of things. But then when I read Jesus the Christ in the MTC, I twisted my ankle on that dastardly floor they used to have. It was like a wrestling mat, and it was for basketball. And people were turning their ankles every day. They finally changed it to wood, I think, because of all the injuries. But I had to stay in my room in my bed for about a week, and I just blew through Jesus the Christ while I was reading the Book of Mormon. I was studying scriptures night and day, and my love of the Savior is born of my knowledge of the Savior. You've got to come unto him in order to really know him. Now, he made himself known unto me. I wasn't really seeking, knocking, or asking in the Harold B. Lee Library. Now, I was doing the work, but I didn't begin with prayer. My agency was somewhat infringed upon to some degree in the sense that I felt such a strong spirit, but that is also a result. That's
Right.
an if then scenario. If you read the scriptures, whether you pray or not, chances are you're going to feel the spirit. Um, but when I got in the MTC and I read Jesus the Christ, and Talmage really puts such a beautiful
Yes.
image in your heart and in your mind of who Jesus the carpenter, who Jesus was. And then he tells you who Christ was. Because, it's always interesting living here in Tennessee, it's all about Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And it's great, it's true, but we really believe in Christ. I mean, he's got a first name and a title last name. And
Yeah.
it's the Christ part that I think for members of the restored gospel that really where the rubber really hits the road. I mean, we loved Jesus as a lad, and don't get me wrong, it was great when he was teaching at the courts and in the temples and with the everybody, and we love everything else that happened to him and the Garden of Gethsemane and all the things that led up to really being the Christ. But it is the Christ that we celebrate, revere, love, and worship. And that MTC experience. If I know I'm talking a lot,
Please keep going.
but I just want to share the MTC was my waters of Mormon. Um, just that whole thing when it talks about how beautiful that is to those that there came to know Christ. The waters of Mormon, the forest of Mormon, all the places of Mormon. Those people, that's a special place for them. That's the MTC for me. It's like that
Yeah.
was my that's where everything changed. And really, a huge part of that was music. My brother sang in the MTC choir when he was there, and he recommended that I do the same. I've always loved music, never been a musician, never been taught to sing, but I have a good ear. I can keep a tune, I can figure it out. I'd only sung a couple of times in the ward choir, but hadn't quite figured out the theory and where the dots go and everything else. I just kind of listened to the guys around me.
Yes.
Same thing in the MTC, but I was so focused on the lyrics of the words of the songs that I could barely get through them in practice because they were so fresh and new and meaningful to me. So when we were practicing Redeemer of Israel, just with the piano, I'd never really, I mean, the song was familiar, but some of those words for me were just so, and I was like, oh, wow, this is so beautiful. Oh, my goodness. And all these elders and sisters who were raised in families where they had pianos and they know how to do parts. And I'm like, man, this is so great. Oh, wait, it gets better. The night of the show, right? We have the general authority who comes to speak on a Tuesday night, the devotional to all 5,000 of us or whatever it was at the 2,500, 3,000. And I'm seated with my friend, and he was not my companion, but he was in my district, Todd Cherry. We sat in the front row, and there's all these other chairs. I didn't know who they were for. And all of a sudden, in comes the BYU Brass Symphony and a
Oh my gosh.
timpani and all these instruments. And I'm like, what's going on here? We hadn't heard this before. We'd only been playing to the piano. So, of course, we had never heard. When the full orchestra at Temple Square is doing that whole intro, and my lip is already quivering. Oh crap, Redeemer. And we
Yeah.
got going, and I'd say halfway in the first verse, maybe the second, when we split into parts, I was a goner. I mean, I bent over, I even sat down, and I mean, it was so beautiful and so magical and spiritual. And to this day, that rendition of Redeemer of Israel always puts a lump in my throat. And now, mind you, when I'm reading later on my mission, and I'm reading in the scripture as I'm reading the Book of Mormon, and it talks about if you have felt to sing redeeming love, I would ask, can ye feel so now? If I felt to sing the song of redeeming love, Redeemer of Israel, can I feel? It's like the Lord's his little message for me throughout
Yes.
my life. This is for you, Scott. There's two verses in there that talk about singing the song of redeeming love. And to this day, that song remains when the choir does it with the orchestra. Oh boy. Hide the kids, close the windows.
It's gonna
I
get
don't want
ugly.
anybody to see me
Yeah.
because I'm on the ground in a puddle of my own filth.
Oh, that is wonderful. What a fantastic experience,
It
the
was, it really
MTC.
was.
Wow.
You don't really get to say too much on this podcast, do you?
That's the best part. That's the best part of this is I just get to listen to people like you.
Well, I'm sure others give you a minute to interject. I'm sorry, I get talking about it. I feel like I'm doing a fireside.
I tell you, whenever I start talking, that's the low point. That's when people start unsubscribing and turning it off, cancel. We don't need that hee
I
haw
got
in
it.
here. Okay, so you go through your mission, you've got this amazing experience. Now you have this fire burning inside you. But you mentioned that when you went to BYU, you were there for acting. So it
Yeah.
sounds like early in your life, you had a talent and a desire to act.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that
Since I was three, probably two or
since,
three.
okay,
Yeah.
so this was something from the very
Yeah. I never once doubted that I wanted to be an actor, if not a movie star, but at least an actor.
okay.
And really, every successive academic year, it just got more and more clear to me that I could do it because I had such a facility with reading when I was young. Scripts, the interpretation of copy comes so easily to me that if you're doing a cold reading in an audition, if that's how if they're handing you the sides
Mhm,
right then
mhm.
and there for the first time, I'm going to get the part if it's based on talent. In stage work, I could get any part I wanted, essentially,
Okay.
because it doesn't matter. You can be old, young, fat, skinny, black, white, Asian. It doesn't really matter because you're on stage.
Okay.
And, but on screen where everything, oh boy, they really cast for looks. Talent, it's marginally useful, but a good director can direct you into saying it however you want, especially as a kid. When we first moved to Utah, I was reading in the newspaper and saw a want ad that said we're looking for boys ages 8 to 15 for parts in a movie that the Osmonds were producing called The
Okay.
Great Brain. And it was a series of children's books that I was very familiar with. Everyone read them back in the 70s. Really, really funny, good biographical books about a Catholic family in a small town in Utah raising their kids. And one of the sons calls himself the Great Brain because he's so smart. And
Okay.
so he solves mysteries, he cons kids out of their money, he swindles people. They're great little books and they're based on truth. So we knew these books and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is why we moved here. Mom, this is why God led us out west for me to play in this movie with the Osmonds."
Yes.
And long story short, they auditioned 3,000 boys at the Hotel Utah. And it got down to me and one other kid for the not the main brother, but a brother. So a lead
Okay.
role.
Okay.
And or maybe it was the no, it was he was his best friend. That's what it was. But the best friend had a really specific look in the book. In
Okay.
the book, he has this kind of straight blonde hair. That's how he's described. And I had very curly brown hair. And the director pulled my mother aside at one of the callbacks and said, "We're having a real trouble with this because it's down to your son and this other kid. He looks exactly the way the part is described, but your son is such a better actor." He said, "So it's going to come down to either talent or looks." And it went with looks. So it was really my first heartbreaking lesson. I think it was a real blessing at 11 or 12, whatever I was, to not be cast because it was like, my mom she was so good about it. She's like, "Honey, this is how it goes. You're going to
Yeah.
get to that point." Luckily, the filmmakers were nice enough. They said, "We think you have a future. You should come work on this shoot." And so they hired me to be Jimmy Osmond's stand-in so that I at least got out of school. I had a tutor. I worked on the set. I got to see how it was done behind the scenes, how they shoot, how they light, all those things. I was just a sixth grader. And I had some really good stories to tell with the ladies when I got back. So
Yes. Yeah, and that's what it's all about.
it is.
What it's
It
all
was. It was
about.
about scoring chicks. No, uh, that's what we called them. But it was interesting. My mother always told me. She said, make sure that you always put the Lord first and do things His way, and then He'll be your agent. Like He knows what's
Mm,
best for you. He can guide you into the right parts if He wants. He can do anything that He wants for your good. And I followed that, and I followed that to this day. There's been parts that I've been wanted for that after I read the material, I just went, oh, I can't. I just can't. Sorry. Oh, I hate to turn
Yeah.
away people who want me, but
Yes.
I don't want to, I don't want to say that. I don't want to be in that. I don't want to be, well, your character doesn't do any of those things. I know, but in the movie, it's in there,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so I haven't been perfect. I was really, really close to being perfect at it for a long time. And then an NCIS episode came up that I really wanted. And I even tried to change some of the language when we were rehearsing. And it's very PG cuss words, in our
Sure.
faith, I mean, the HE double hockey sticks, that kind of a thing. And, but I remember in the rehearsal, this is NCIS with Mark Harmon. And, this is the
Right.
show had been on at the time. It was this 15th or 16th season, and I'm just this schmo who's coming on for a day, and we rehearsed the scene and I try to say heck and darn, you know,
Yeah.
and the director was like, perfect. Yeah, that's exactly how we'll do it. So Scott, you'll come over here. And then he did a line read, which all actors hate. They hate it when the director, reads the lines for them. But I think it was just his way of saying, here's how you'll say it. And then he actually used the words.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, understood. Okay. It's nothing worse than you probably catch me saying on a golf course. I mean, let's all be honest. In our own work, wherever
Yes.
we work, we occasionally have those moments where something
Yep.
comes out. Unfortunately, in my work, other people see or hear it, and it's
Yes.
like, "Hey, aren't you?" And
Yeah.
so
I
you
thought
do
you.
get that. You do get that from some of the other actors, that aren't LDS who say, you know, you should
Yeah.
should you
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
saying that or, you know.
Okay. So that's what I'm glad that we're getting here because I look at your IMDb page and you've been in a lot of stuff, a wide variety of stuff,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. Some of it is very cultural LDS, and some of it, I mean, NCIS, multiple episodes of different
Yeah.
versions of NCIS.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I mean that it's hard to get more legit. I mean, they're all legit, but you know what I mean. That's
No,
very
I do.
mainstream. That's very
Yeah.
mainstream. Was it? We already talked a little bit about you trying to set standards and trying to adhere to those. Was it difficult just to be on set? Did people have a reputation? Do other actors check out actors' IMDb pages and saying mobsters and Mormons? What's mobsters and Mormons? Or I mean, like, is it hard to how do you
You
navigate
know,
that?
it's a great question because for me, honestly, and this isn't just because I'm on this podcast, but honestly, every time I did anything in LA at one of the cool studios, that you get to go to, and like, hey man, this is where they shoot Taxi or whatever. Taxi. Oh gosh, it's been 50 years since Taxi was on the air. But anyway, um,
It's now called Uber. It's where they
Matt,
shot
yeah,
Uber. Yeah.
yeah, ride share.
Yeah.
Um, but every time that I work in a non-traditional LDS set or somewhere, I mean, I'm always starting the day in my prayer with, please bless me to be sensitive to opportunities to answer questions, or just be an example where
Mhm.
if they somehow see anything in my countenance, heaven help me if I could somehow get the countenance, I would love to have that. But if there's anything all that I can do, say, be anything I can share, please help me to live worthy of that. Because when you get on the set, there's always a little insecurity. You're trying to stake your own claim. You got to be confident, but not cocky and overbearing. But so you sometimes you feel like you got to fit in and sort of fit in. Do you bend your typical dialogue and conversation methods and modes, or do you laugh at something you normally wouldn't? Those are the things I'm praying to be careful about.
Yes.
But almost 100% of the time that I am at on those sets with makeup people, wardrobe, the cast, anyone else, you have time to talk always. Hurry up and wait. And so inevitably it comes out, where are you from? Where do you live? And instead
Mhm.
of saying I live in Burbank or Glendale or Mission Hills or wherever, I live in Salt Lake City. Well, I don't live there now, but when I did, and they'll go, oh, really? Yeah, 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 I commute, what the heck? And they're like, are you a Mormon? Oh, yeah, yes, yes. And then it starts.
Yes.
Julie Bowen, who played Claire on Modern Family. And in fact, Ty Burrell, who plays Phil, if you've watched the show, I mean, it was one of those shows that for me at first I was like, I want to watch. There's just so much garbage out there, and the way that it kind of just normalizes all of these different lifestyles. And that lasted about an hour and a half till I saw an actual episode, and I was like, okay, it's very, very well written, very well acted, hilarious, and it was a class. 10 years. You can't. And I'm
Yes.
like, okay, and it's not TVMA. God bless them, really. And so to be able to be on an episode was like pretty cool. But Julie Bowen and Ty Burrell, I spent a couple hours waiting with them just for one scene. I had a few lines. They gave one of my lines to Julie because I did it funny. And they're like, oh, when I got to the set, they said, yeah, we gave that to Julie. You were really funny in your audition, and we wanted her to have the laugh. I'm like,
Okay.
yeah, that's great. Thanks. I had three lines. Now I have two.
Yeah.
Um, but, I had a great talk with her about raising sons because I have five sons and she has four sons. And we talked about parenting, and we talked about, New York Times crossword puzzles. She loves to do them. She pulled one out of her purse. She said, I always carry an extra copy. Have you done today's? I said, no, I haven't. And so
Yes.
just those little moments. Ty Burrell, I know that his wife went to the U, and they own a club or a bar or something in Salt Lake City. He's basically a Utah half of his life. He and I had some great conversations. Chris O'Donnell on NCIS Los Angeles. We got talking about how he's a very staunch Catholic and how I'm a very staunch Latter-day Saint. He said, I got to tell you, we've had a couple of neighbors living next to us, this older couple that are LDS. They are the grandchildren to my kids. They absolutely love them. They've lived next to us for 20 years. They're like our closest friends. Then when I went back a year or two later for another episode, I asked him how his neighbors are doing. He said they both passed away. He said they passed away within a week or so of each other. He said, we really, really miss them. He's like, we have been so impressed by them and their faith and their goodness. And um, it's interesting. You have those conversations, if you want them, way more often than not on LA sets. I think there's an image that people are snorting cocaine and there's hookers in the dressing room. And I apologize for bringing any of these images onto this fine podcast you do, which is about Jesus. But I mean, the reality is that there are a lot of really, really good people
Yes.
who work in and around my industry. And I got to tell you, I've had more positive experiences, I think, when it comes to the church and being an example in LA than I have on some of the sets in Utah, or on those
Yeah.
kinds of projects. So
I love hearing that because I think sometimes we can get into the idea of exactly what you're talking about. The world is so bad. We got to stay away from the world, and it's wicked and it's evil and it's that kind of stuff. And I think, okay, yes, there's an understanding there, and we need to be in the world but not of the world.
right.
But let's not forget that the world is us. Everybody is the world, and the world was created by a loving heavenly Father for us. So, yeah, I mean, let's just remember there are so many great people out there in every industry, people who are doing the absolute best that they do with the light that they have and trying to make the world a better place, however they know how to do it.
So true. Now, not to discount the fact that when they come to Utah to shoot things, they are inevitably enamored by the
Yes.
state, by the cleanliness, by the kindness of the people, by the professional crews. I mean, there's so many people that work and live full time in Utah in the film industry that are so experienced and so professional that they do, when you get out of state, LA based or New York based cruise, production teams coming in, they expect that the quality is going to drop a notch because it's little podunk Utah.
Yeah.
And they inevitably come away saying, holy cow, we need to shoot more series there because the
Yes.
local talent is amazing. And I'll tell you, when I worked on Granite Flats, a series from BYU
Hmm.
TV, I was the only Latter-day Saint actor who was kind of one of the main cast members. And even that didn't occur until about episode 3 or so. Um, but those people have become very good friends with each other and with me. And they knew that I was kind of the point man in
Hmm.
terms of reflecting the church and its values and what will people say or think? What will you people think or say if I do this or I do that or if I act this way? Um, there were some really, really good impressions made on some of the cast that came to town. In fact, I was just today, I was at the gym and I was watching an episode of The Mentalist
Yes.
uh, on the treadmill, and Annie Tedesco, who played Beth in Granite Flats, those of you that have seen it will know who I mean. She was in this episode. And I'm like, oh, it's from 10 or 12 years ago. So it's probably even before she did Granite Flats. And so I texted her. I said, I'm in the gym watching you in a gym. Because the scene, she's in a gym. And she said, oh my gosh, it's so good to hear. How are things? I miss Utah. I miss you guys. What's going on? But that sentiment of these Utah-based crews, there is a certain spirit among them, which is cool.
That's fantastic. Scott, you have been so generous with your time tonight. Thank you again for doing this. As we wrap
My
up,
pleasure.
what advice would you give someone? What advice would you give yourself? As you look back to elementary school, you just stole your first item, your first pack of gum. What advice would you give to yourself?
Put it back.
Yeah.
Uh, put it back. It's funny. I would probably do the same thing that my bishop did. I would hope they really tried to help me understand the atonement and the priesthood because I believe I had it. I had just received the Aaronic priesthood, and then they suspended it. You know, they definitely did a watered down juvenile version of a church court
Hmm.
for all of us, and it was definitely a court of love. But we all were suspended from priesthood duties. Now, for some of us, it was like, oh, good, I don't have to pass, I don't have to prepare. But they really tried to make that happen. And I would do, I think, exactly what my bishop did. He was one of the guys that we actually stole from because we didn't just steal, by the way, we didn't just steal from stores. We would leave sacrament meeting after passing the sacrament. I got to go get a drink. And we meet in the foyer. We'd go to the ward members' homes that we knew were at church because we had just seen them.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's staggering to me
Sure.
how
It's pretty, yeah,
lame we were. Uh, it's interesting how Satan can truly blind your eyes and
sure.
blind your mind, even when you're just a little turkey. Um, but anyway, my bishop, when after all was said and done, and I'd been forgiven and it moved on, for Christmas, my mother got me a tape recorder. That was all I wanted. I wanted a tape recorder so bad so that I could record myself doing little plays and acting like I was on the radio. I worked in radio for a while early in my career, and that was a dream. Um, and it was from Radio Shack. It was a Tandy or a Realistic, one of these cheap brands, and it broke. Like the day after Christmas, it broke and it wouldn't work. And my mom said, why don't you go ask Bishop Fielding if he'll fix it for you? Now, this was our current bishop who I had stolen from, entered his home. Uh, just such a breach of trust and love. And so she made me. She took me over, dropped me off at his house. He was expecting me. I came to the door, you know, with this broken thing. I thought for sure I was a dead man because he was a big, big guy. Come on in, Scott. I was like, oh gosh, I'm so nervous. He takes me downstairs. He has a shop, a little workshop with nuts and bolts and tools and soldering dad stuff, man things. I was immediately like, wow, do dads do this? I'm like, and I thought for sure that he was going to lay into me. Let me take a look at that. Fixing it. How are things? What are you doing? What do you want to be when you grow up? Tell me about your dreams. Da, 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 da. He never once mentioned it. Didn't bring it up. Didn't even bother. Which, looking back in hindsight, now as an adult, I can see.
Mhm.
That's what I would do. You don't lord it over them. The kid's repented. He's moved on. It's a silly little thing. It's not like I stole his retirement funds. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Like $11 in change or something. But the love that I felt from that man, um, it was probably exaggerated in my young fatherless eyes, but it was powerful. For him to not broach the subject and to just happily sit there as I nervously waited. He fixed my thing and made it work, handed it to me. There you go, buddy. Thank you. Thank you so much. You have a good day now. Um, I mean, that doesn't really answer your question, I guess. But I guess if I could give any advice to my younger self, it would be to just grow up to be like that man. Because heaven knows you're not going to grow up like your actual dad, you know, who
Yeah.
was a good man, but didn't didn't quite get there. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So,
Wow. Well, again, thank you so much. This has been a very enjoyable night for me, and you have some amazing, inspiring stories. So thank you for
oh,
taking the
thanks,
time.
Zach. My pleasure. Yeah, good to be here.